In the 1700s, New York was a city caught between identities. Old Dutch families still called it New Amsterdam in hushed conversations over gin and tobacco. English officials insisted on New York, stamping the king's authority onto every legal document. But walk the muddy streets, and you'd hear something else entirely, a chaos of Dutch, English, French, German, African dialects, and native languages colliding in the markets and taverns. A port town where profit mattered more than purity, where tolerance wasn't an ideal but a business necessity, enhanced through AI reconstruction. We're going back to witness the transformation. This is New York, finding its mercantile soul, one ship, one deal, one chaotic transaction at a time. Let's begin where the city still had edges. In the 1700s, the old defensive wall still marked Manhattan's northern boundary, running east to west along what everyone simply called Wall Street. Beyond it lay farms, orchards, and the uncertain wilderness of the island's interior. This reconstruction shows the wall meeting the East River at the Watergate, a fortified passage where carts loaded with country produce entered the city under guard. The wall wasn't really defending against attack anymore. It was controlling commerce, taxing movement, defining who was inside the city's profitable embrace and who was still outside. South of this line, everything pulsed with commercial energy. The East River waterfront was the city's beating heart. Ships from London, Bristol, the Caribbean, and West Africa crowded the docks. Longboats shuttled between anchored vessels and the shore, their oarsmen cursing in multiple languages as they navigated the tidal currents. By the early 1700s, English rule was established, but New York's architecture told a different story. The steep gabled houses with their distinctive Dutch brickwork still dominated the streetscape. Wealthy merchants lived in solid brick homes with crow-stepped gables, thick walls, and small leaded windows designed to hold warmth during brutal winters. Notice the mix, some houses purely Dutch in style, others showing English additions. The city was literally rebuilding itself piece by piece. The old Stadhuis, the Dutch city hall, still functioned as New York's administrative center until 1703. English magistrates and Dutch clerks worked in the same cramped rooms where New Amsterdam's officials had once governed. Records were kept in both languages. Legal disputes were settled using a confusing hybrid of Dutch and English common law. The city operated in translation. A Jewish trader from Portugal, speaking yet another language. What made New York thrive in the 1700s wasn't grand vision or careful planning. It was location and opportunism. The harbor was magnificent, protected, deep, accessible nearly year-round. The Hudson River reached deep into the interior. The port could handle large ships, and the city quickly became the colonial trade nexus between European markets, Caribbean sugar islands, and the American frontier. This reconstruction from around 1720 shows the Great Dock stretching into the East River. Every day, barrels rolled across these weathered planks, rum from Barbados, molasses from Jamaica, beaver pelts from the frontier, tobacco from Virginia, manufactured goods from London. Merchants didn't ask too many questions about origins or destinations. The city's merchant class grew wealthy and confident. They built substantial homes, imported fine furniture and silver, dressed their wives in London fashions. But this wasn't Boston's Puritan restraint or Philadelphia's Quaker modesty. New York merchants were brasher, more willing to bend rules, more comfortable with moral ambiguity. Smuggling wasn't exactly legal, but it wasn't exactly unusual either. Everyone knew someone who knew how to avoid certain customs duties. By 1730, the population had grown to roughly 10,000. The city was expanding beyond the old wall line, creeping northward. New streets were laid out, still irregular, still following the logic of property boundaries and geographic features. But here's what we cannot ignore. New York's commercial success was built substantially on enslaved labor. By the 1740s, nearly 20% of the city's population was enslaved, one of the highest proportions of any northern city. These weren't distant plantation fields. This was urban slavery, intimate and immediate. Enslaved people worked in households, at the docks, in workshops and warehouses. They loaded ships, built houses. In 1712, A slave uprising shook the city to its core. A group of enslaved men and women set fire to a building and attacked the whites who came to extinguish it. The revolt was crushed brutally. The aftermath was even more brutal executions designed to terrorize. Laws tightened to control movement and assembly. Fear rippled through both enslaved and free populations. The city responded not with reflection but with repression. Enslaved labor was too profitable to abandon. Despite the risks, everyone now understood more clearly. By 1750, New York had grown to roughly 15,000 people. The city was expanding northward and developing distinct neighborhoods. The waterfront remained intensely commercial. Wealthy merchants built estates in the Bowery and along the East River. Artisans and laborers clustered in the middle wards. Churches of multiple denominations: Dutch, Reformed, Anglican, Presbyterian, Lutheran. Even a small Jewish synagogue marked the skyline. This reconstruction from 1760 shows the city from the harbor. You can see how dense the southern tip has become. Buildings pressed close together, multiple wharves jutting into the river. But notice how quickly it thins out as you move north. Within blocks, the city dissolves into farms and open land. The streets bustled with a diversity that shocked visitors from more homogeneous colonies. This wasn't some Enlightenment ideal of cosmopolitanism. It was chaotic, sometimes hostile diversity born from pure commercial pragmatism. Different groups needed each other to trade, to build, to make the machinery of profit turn. So they coexisted, uneasily, constantly negotiating. As the 1760s progressed, that commercial pragmatism started creating political tension. New York merchants had grown rich by playing between legal trade and creative interpretation of British trade laws. When Parliament began tightening enforcement and imposing new taxes after the 7 Years' War, the city's merchant class found their profitable ambiguity threatened. The Stamp Act crisis of 1765 brought riots to New York streets, not because merchants loved liberty in the abstract, but because they loved profit in the particular. British soldiers stationed in the city became a constant irritant. The occupation wasn't military in the traditional sense, no battles, but their presence reminded everyone that New York existed within an empire that could squeeze tighter whenever it chose. By 1775, the city was deeply divided. Loyalist sentiment ran strong, especially among those whose wealth depended on British trade networks. But patriot feeling was growing too, particularly among artisans and merchants who saw independence as opening new opportunities. The streets saw confrontations, heated arguments in taverns, pamphlets circulating with increasing boldness before the British invasion. Ships crowd the docks, but now they're being watched by both sides. Some are bringing supplies for the Continental Army, others are suspected of loyalist sympathies. The commercial city was being forced to choose political sides, and it didn't do so easily or uniformly. When British forces captured New York in September 1776, they recognized what the city had become: the most strategically valuable port in North America. They would hold it for 7 years, making it their military headquarters, their commercial lifeline, their proof that empire could still work. But New York had already become something that couldn't be controlled by any single power. A place where profit mattered more than pedigree, where diversity was accepted because it was useful, where the future was being invented in muddy streets and crowded markets without anyone quite realizing it. The modern Manhattan of glass and steel and millions is a direct descendant of this 18th century port town. The energy, the ambition, the diversity, the complicated relationship with money and morality, it was all there in the 1700s, already shaping a city that would eventually shape the world. This is what New York looked like before America existed. These reconstructions let us see it, walk through it, and understand where the chaos began.